The year is 2075. An alien parasite crash-landed on Earth, infecting a human host. It fed, grew, and erupted as a human-alien hybrid queen. Her eggs spawned worm-like parasites, infecting humans and animals alike. Earth fell. Humanity's last hope, the Ark, a massive spaceship carrying the survivors. Their destination, Kepler 22b, a habitable world light-years away. But the Queen had one last trick. She stowed away, hitching a ride across the stars. The Ark crash-landed on Kepler 22b, and with it, humanity's nightmare began anew. Now, on an alien world, the survivors face their greatest challenge. Sarah, a scientist who experimented on herself with alien DNA, fights the mutation within her genes. But Kepler 22b harbors its own horrors. A local parasite infects the unwary, encasing them in black cocoons. From these, winged demon-like creatures emerge. In the shadows of the alien base, humanity's last stand unfolds.
The intercom crackled with static before falling dead, leaving only a suffocating silence that settled over the base like a burial shroud. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest as she clutched Jack's hand tightly. The dim emergency lighting cast long, ominous shadows across the walls of the corridor. Every flicker seemed to breathe life into the darkness, turning the shadows into writhing shapes that appeared ready to spring forth. Sergeant Reed, his face set in a grim expression, barked orders to the survivors, his voice cutting through the quiet.
Everyone arm yourselves. Get to the armory now.
The sound of hurried footsteps echoed off the metal walls as people scrambled to follow Reed's commands, their movements frantic. The base had been their sanctuary on this alien world, but now it felt like a trap. Fear rippled through the survivors, and Sarah could feel it in the air. Thick, oppressive, suffocating. She squeezed Jack's hand tighter, knowing they had to move, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. A distant noise cut through the silence, a low, muffled growl, followed by the unmistakable sound of something wet and heavy dragging along the floor. Sarah's blood ran cold. They were already inside. The aliens had breached the perimeter, and now they were hunting them, turning the base into their hunting grounds. Reed raised his plasma rifle and motioned for the group to follow him, his voice barely a whisper.
Stay close. We stick together, or we don't survive.
They moved as one, creeping through the narrow corridors, every sound amplified in the stillness. Sarah's senses were on high alert, her mind racing as they edged closer to the armory. She could feel Jack's hand trembling in hers, and she glanced at him, trying to offer what little reassurance she could.
It's going to be okay,
she whispered, though even she wasn't sure she believed it. As they rounded a corner, the stench of something rotten hit them, thick, cloying, and rancid. Reed held up a fist, signaling them to stop. They all froze, their eyes scanning the dark hallway ahead. That's when they saw it. A cocoon. It was pulsating, black and grotesque, stuck to the wall like some twisted nightmare. The smell of decay emanated from it, and as Sarah stepped closer, her breath caught in her throat. Inside the cocoon, she could make out the shape of a human, one of their own, entombed in the alien's horrific creation. Its body twitched unnaturally, limbs jerking beneath the layers of slick, pulsating membrane. The sight was nauseating.
Oh my God!
One of the survivors whispered, barely able to hold back their horror. Reed stepped forward, his rifle trained on the cocoon, but Sarah quickly grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with urgency.
Don't shoot,
she hissed.
The noise could bring more of them. We need to keep moving.
He hesitated but nodded, lowering his weapon. The group skirted around the cocoon, their eyes locked on it as if at any moment it might burst open and unleash something unspeakable. Every second spent near it was a test of their nerves. But finally, they passed it and continued down the corridor, their footsteps quickening. They reached the armory, a fortified room deep within the base. Reed punched in the code and the door slid open with a heavy hiss. Inside, rows of advanced weaponry gleamed under the dim lights. Plasma rifles, flamethrower, explosives. The survivors wasted no time grabbing whatever they could carry. Sarah grabbed a rifle and slung it over her shoulder, her mind racing. She wasn't a soldier, but she knew how to fight. The base had drilled them all in survival tactics the moment they had landed on Kepler 22b. They had been prepared for hostile wildlife, but this was beyond anything they had imagined. As she loaded the rifle, She felt a strange sensation ripple through her body, an intense heat that started in her chest and spread outward. She sucked in a sharp breath, steadying herself. Her alien blood was stirring again, a constant reminder of the transformation happening inside her. She had felt it growing stronger with each passing day, and now, in this moment of terror, it was becoming harder to control.
Sarah,
Reed's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood at the doorway, his face grim.
we need to rig the core. It's the only way we can buy time. We can't let these things take over the entire base.
She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she tightened her grip on the rifle.
Let's do it.
The survivors gathered their weapons, and together they ventured deeper into the bowels of the base, where the nuclear core awaited. Every step felt like a march toward the unknown, the air heavy with tension. The deeper they went, the colder it seemed to get, and the light from above faded, leaving them in near darkness. Suddenly a screech echoed through the halls, a bone-chilling cry that reverberated off the walls, followed by the rapid skittering of claws on metal. Reed raised his rifle, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead.
They're here.
He whispered, his voice laced with dread. Then, from the shadows, they emerged. Monstrous forms, alien creatures with sinewy bodies, glistening with mucus and dark as midnight. Their elongated skulls and razor-sharp teeth glinted in the dim light as they moved with terrifying speed, vanishing into the shadows only to reappear again. They were silent killers, their presence marked only by the flashes of movement and the sickening hiss of their acidic blood as it dripped onto the floor. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. They were outnumbered, trapped in the belly of the base with nowhere to run. And then she felt it again, the surge of alien power within her. Her vision sharpened, her senses heightened, and the fire coursing through her veins ignited into something primal. As the aliens lunged at them, she didn't hesitate. With a fierce cry, Sarah charged forward, her rifle blazing as she fired into the oncoming horde. The survivors followed suit, their weapons lighting up the darkness in a barrage of firepower. But for every alien they took down, another seemed to rise from the shadows, their relentless assault never ended. In the chaos, Sarah felt something shift inside her, something dark and powerful. Her skin began to harden, her muscles bulging as the alien blood took hold. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to become something else, something more. But as the battle raged on, one thing became terrifyingly clear. The deeper they went, the more the darkness seemed to welcome her, and the Queen was waiting. The air grew colder as they descended deeper into the base's bowels, the faint hum of the nuclear core vibrating beneath their feet. The survivors moved in tight formation, their weapons raised and their eyes darting nervously into every shadow. The eerie glow of the emergency lights cast long, flickering shadows along the metal walls, creating a sense of being watched from all sides. Sergeant Reed led the group, his jaw clenched and his rifle at the ready. His mind was focused solely on their mission, reaching the nuclear core and setting it to overload. He knew the gravity of what they were about to do. Overloading the core meant losing the base, but it was the only way to stop the Queen and her brood from spreading further. Behind him, Sarah, Jack, and a few other survivors followed closely, their faces tight with fear and exhaustion.
How much further?
One of the survivors whispered, their voice tight with tension. Reed checked the dimly lit map on his wrist console and kept his voice low.
Just around the next bend. Stay sharp.
Sarah walked beside her son, Jack, her breath shallow as she kept a tight grip on his hand. Her mind buzzed with the increasing pressure of the alien instincts rising within her. She could feel the Queen's presence growing stronger with every step they took closer to the core. The whispers in her mind, though faint, were becoming harder to ignore. She knew what was coming. The final confrontation was near. As they turned the corner, the narrow corridor opened into a larger chamber. The core room loomed ahead, its walls lined with pipes and wires, the air humming with the powerful energy contained within the nuclear reactor. The room was cold and sterile, the only light coming from the faint, pulsing glow of the core itself.
Secure the perimeter.
Reed ordered, his voice firm.
We'll set the overload and get the hell out of here.
The group fanned out around the room, checking for any signs of movement in the shadows. The tension was suffocating. Every noise, every flicker of light made their nerves jump. They all knew what was lurking in the depths of the base, the Queen, her offspring, and the horrors they had unleashed. Reed moved to the core's control console, his fingers deftly tapping at the keys. The screen blinked to life, and he quickly began inputting the override codes to disable the failsafes. Time was running out, and he knew they needed to move fast. As Reed worked, Sarah stood guard nearby, her senses heightened by the alien blood coursing through her veins. She could feel the pressure building inside her, a growing darkness that threatened to consume her. Her transformation was accelerating, and she struggled to keep it at bay. Every pulse of the core seemed to resonate with the alien power within her, calling to her like a siren song.
How are we looking?
Sarah asked, her voice tense.
Almost there.
Reed replied without looking up from the console.
Just a few more minutes.
Suddenly, a bone-chilling screech echoed through the chamber. The sound sent shivers down everyone's spine, and they all snapped to attention, their weapons raised. The Queen was close.
They're here,
one of the survivors whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the core. Reed's hands moved faster across the console.
We're almost out of time. We need to set this thing and go. Now.
Sarah's heart raced as the alien instincts within her surged. Her senses sharpened to an almost painful degree, and she could feel the presence of the Queen drawing nearer. The whispers in her mind grew louder, urging her to submit, to join the Queen in her dominion over this new world. But Sarah fought against it, gritting her teeth and focusing on the task at hand. She had to protect Jack and the others, no matter the cost.
Reed!
Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the tension.
Hurry!
Reed's fingers flew over the controls.
I'm working on it!
As if in response to their urgency, the air in the room grew colder, and a deep, rumbling growl echoed through the walls. From the shadows, one of the Queen's elite creatures emerged, larger and more terrifying than any they had seen before. Its black, sinewy form glistened in the dim light, and its glowing yellow eyes locked onto the survivors with a predatory gaze.
Incoming!
Reed shouted, slamming the final command into the console. The core's countdown began, a digital timer flashing ominously on the screen.
It's set. We've got less than an hour.
The creature lunged at them with terrifying speed, its claws outstretched, and its acidic saliva dripping from its fanged maw. Sarah moved instinctively, throwing herself in front of Jack and raising her weapon. But before she could fire, the alien power inside her surged, taking over her body. Her transformation accelerated violently. Her skin hardened, her muscles bulged, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. She could feel the alien strength coursing through her, fueling her every move. With a feral growl, she launched herself at the creature, meeting its attack head-on. Reed and the others could only watch in shock as Sarah tore into the elite alien with savage ferocity. Her movements were fluid and deadly, her claws slashing through the creature's flesh as though it were nothing. The alien screeched in pain, but Sarah showed no mercy, driving it back with blow after blow. The fight was brutal and relentless, the two of them locked in a violent dance of survival. But as Sarah fought, the whispers in her mind grew louder, more insistent. The Queen's voice called to her, urging her to give in to the power, to embrace her destiny as one of them.
Sarah,
Reed shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos.
Don't let it take you.
Sarah's body trembled as she fought against the Queen's influence. She could feel the alien power clawing at her mind, trying to consume her, but she couldn't. She wouldn't let it win. With a final roar of defiance, Sarah slammed her fist into the creature's chest, tearing it apart in a spray of black blood and gore. The alien collapsed to the ground, its body twitching before going still. Breathing heavily, Sarah stood over the creature's remains, her body still trembling with the power she had unleashed. She could feel the darkness inside her, still lurking, still waiting for the chance to take control.
Sarah?
Reed called again, more softly this time, stepping toward her cautiously.
We need to go.
Sarah turned to face him, her glowing eyes meeting his. For a moment, Reed hesitated. He wasn't sure if the woman standing before him was still Sarah or something far more dangerous. But then slowly the glow in her eyes faded, and Sarah took a deep breath, forcing the alien power back inside her. She was still in control, barely.
I'm fine,
she said, though her voice betrayed the struggle within her.
Let's move.
With the core's countdown ticking away, the group quickly gathered their gear and made their way out of the chamber. The base was collapsing around them, and the sounds of the Queen's brood grew louder with every step they took. The clock was ticking, and they had no time to lose. But as they fled through the darkened corridors, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Queen was still out there, and she was waiting for them. And Sarah knew that the next time they faced her, it wouldn't just be a battle for survival, it would be a battle for her very soul. The sound of collapsing metal echoed through the base as the countdown to the core's overload continued ticking down. Flames and debris cascaded from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the stench of burning circuits and blood. The survivors moved as one through the crumbling corridors, their steps quick and deliberate. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy, every corner a possible ambush. Sergeant Reed led the way, his eyes scanning ahead for any signs of movement. Behind him, Sarah fought to keep her breathing steady, her mind torn between the chaos of the base's collapse and the darkness stirring inside her. The alien power still hummed through her veins, its presence ever growing and harder to suppress. Jack clung tightly to her side, his hand gripping hers, his eyes wide with fear but determined to keep moving. The group's pace quickened as they approached the outer doors of the base, but before they could reach them, a familiar, bone-chilling screech echoed through the halls. Everyone froze, their weapons immediately raised. The screech belonged to the Queen.
She's coming.
Reed muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on his rifle.
We have to move. Now!
Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook violently, knocking several of the survivors off balance. The walls trembled as if something massive was approaching from below. The group exchanged worried glances, and before anyone could speak, the floor beneath them cracked open, sending half the survivors tumbling into the darkness below.